Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Austin Molinaro.
And I'm Chris Kaleko.
And today we are here bringing you a little pregame show of the MSL Championship. It is Prospect against Barrington. Chris, what can we expect between these two teams?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very big offensive battle. You know, people such as Edgy Tim have called the Prospect offense the greatest show on turf. And Austin, I'm wondering what you think will happen with this Barrington offense competing against that.
You know, we also have to question Edgy Tim's predictions. Although he is the #1 beat writer for high school football in Illinois, he has bet against Barrington nearly every single game of their season. He said Friend was going to beat Barrington, Palatine was going to beat Barrington, and even Hoffman Estates was going to beat Barrington. He's 0 for 3 when it comes to those predictions, and now Barrington is 5-0, riding high against the 5-0 Prospect Knights, and we're going to get a huge grudge match. What do you have to say about their offenses, Chris?
Yeah, looking at these two offenses in particular with the Barrington offense, they have the most points per game in the MSL West with 35.6, and they also happen to be leading the MSL West and have led the entire season in terms of yards per game. And when we're looking at this star-studded Bronco offense, I want to take one look at Peter Anderson, the only quarterback in the MSL West to have over 1,000 yards and even led all other passers by 400 yards. He also complemented this 1,000-yard season with 11 passing touchdowns through the air. Now, when we look at this backfield, we see Brian Smith, the leading rusher in the MSL West by about 200 yards. Yeah, he was even up for MSL West Player of the Week last week versus Hoffman.
He's also with another running back, Jack Kekchek, who had 2 touchdowns last week and is third in rushing in the MSL West and has been totally going off in the later stages of this regular season. And he's a huge part to why Barrington has been putting up so many points. And leading back to Peter Anderson, he also gets it done on the ground with 5 rushing touchdowns, and he also has a quarterback rating of 123.4. This offense is totally loaded. And this offensive line does play a huge role into their game. That's why their rushing has been so lethal throughout the season. And Peter Anderson gets a lot of time to look for open receivers. And that brings us to our next point. Let's talk about those Barrington wide receivers.
Yeah, speaking of that Barrington wide receiver core, let's look at the head of it with senior Joey Gerskis, who is second in the MSL West in terms of receptions. And he's looking like Peter Anderson's favorite target. Yeah, and Joey is complemented by senior receiver Drew Shorts, who is very dangerous in open field, as we saw last week versus the Hoffman Hawks defense.
And to follow up those 2 very talented receivers, they have guys like Ryan Smith and Ben Kakoma to help Peter Anderson within the passing game, and that's what makes the Broncos' offense totally lethal. They have no weaknesses, and I think they're going to put up some points against Prospect.
Yeah, so the Barrington offense faces this Knights defense this week. And Austin, how do you think that the Knights D stacks up against the Broncos' heavy O?
You know, me being the football guru I am, I took it to the tape and I watched the Prospect Knights. They run a 3-5-3 and they love sending the pressure because I don't really think the Prospect coaches really want to depend on their secondary. We see in and out through every game, Prospect is pressuring these quarterbacks, so that's going to be a tough test to handle with Barrington's offensive line. How will they manage to protect Peter Anderson and score all these points when the Prospect Knights are running 7, 8, 6, whatever it may be at Peter Anderson's head?
Yeah, and this swarming Prospect D-line is led by Decker Anderson and a personal friend of mine, Charlie Carroll, who are known to get after the quarterback.
But Chris, what do you think about the Prospect Knights secondary? How do you think the Broncos are planning to attack them through this game?
Yeah, I think definitely when I'm looking at the weaknesses or weak points of this Prospect D, I'm looking specifically at that secondary who's been exploited over and over again by somewhat weaker opposition. So we'll see how they favor up against some very lethal Bronco wide receivers.
Yeah, and we know these Prospect Knights, they're still a good team. That secondary still has filled up the stats. They've gotten a good amount of interceptions, especially in their front 7 with their linebackers, who have also been a key contributor to Prospect successes. But the secondary definitely is the weak end of their team, and I think the Broncos will be looking to attack that.
So, Austin, how do you think this Broncos D has looked this season?
You know, this Broncos D has been the reason why they've been so dominant. You know, over the course of the season, they only allowed over 14 points one time against Friend, and they still won 35-21. This Broncos team is It's one of the best I've seen since my years at the high school, and I'm a junior, so I've only been here for 3 years. But this front seven does get after the quarterback with guys like Evan Roper and Ethan Pataki both leading the MSL West with 4 sacks. And let's not forget about that secondary. Guys like Evan Kruger and Darren Darlington and a good friend of mine, Connor Lee, are all stepping up to the plate and guarding these really talented wide receivers. So I think they'll be looking to match up against these other talented wide receivers on these prospect nights, and this defense is looking nearly like an immovable object. Not many teams being able to get anything off against them, and it might be the prospect night's worst nightmare. We'll have to see. But that brings us to our next point, the prospect offense. Chris, can you give us a little elaboration on that?
And this Broncos D has proved, as you said, immovable this season, leading first in points allowed per game and first in yards per game. But this prospect nights, as we've seen all season long, will probably be the Broncos' greatest test.
Yeah, led by Gary Moeller, their quarterback, number 2 on the prospect nights. He's been going off, just coming off of a 5-touchdown performance and 258 yards against Buffalo Grove, and that was a high-stakes game too. So I think this prospect offense is trying to continue that trend of playing in high-stakes games. They wouldn't even be here if they didn't win that game, but they definitely showed up, scoring 55 points, and that offense is lethal, averaging 49.6 points per game. That is 14 more. That's 2 touchdowns more than Barrington's offense. But Barrington's offense, they've been first in the MSL West for nearly everything. And let's talk about the guy who's been putting on a show on the turf and helping the prospect Knights win nearly all their games. Luke Zardin, what can you tell me about him?
Yeah, and Luke Zardin of the Prospect Knights going to NIU next year has looked unstoppable, especially in these last 2 games, racking up 8 touchdowns in just those 2 games alone. And wow, will he be a great test for the Bronco defense this week.
Yeah, and he is just all around good at everything. It seems like he's strong, he's elusive, he has speed, and the main thing that some Barrington defender was telling me on the scouting report is that he has one of the best visions to run through those holes in the mid-suburban league, and he's going to be a tough task. Probably the Broncos, they haven't really played many good running backs throughout the season, and if they did, they were shutting them down. But, Luke Zardin, he's going to be a problem for that Broncos defense. So, Chris, how do you think this Broncos defense is planning to hold Luke Zardin from giving the Knights a bunch of points?
Yeah, if I'm Joe Sanchez, I am eliminating Zardin out of this game completely. I'm doing whatever I can to make sure there's a man always on him. I'm stacking the box, maybe taking a little bit of a page out of the Knights playbook and maybe sending a couple more guys than they'd usually do on heavier blitzes, maybe 6 or 7 guys, in order to shut down Zardin completely, because I think that if Zardin is shut down, this Knights offense is shut down as well.
Yeah, we see this Broncos defense, they do not send the pressure a lot. Sometimes they'll get blitzes coming off of the line, which helps them a lot. But we see their front four doing a lot of the work for them. And Ethan Pataki, Luke Rosenzweig, and Evan Roper. We see these guys getting after the quarterback repeatedly. But Gary Moeller has been protected by that prospect offensive line, which allows him to have big games like that 5-touchdown performance last week. And we can't forget Gary Moeller is also a very mobile guy. He has the arm, but he also has the legs. And, that QB running back rushing tandem, that could be a problem for the Broncos. So I think containing him and sending the heat could be a good decision by them. So, Chris, we talked about the defenses, we talked about the offenses. We already know we're in for a great game tonight. But let's not forget who could be the X factor in this game. I think it could be the Bronco faithful.
Yeah, that 12th man has proved prominent in all home games this season. And man, oh man, could they be a troubling sight to the prospect offense and especially that defense if Peter Anderson can get hot.
And, while students and the school has been following COVID restrictions, we've seen the students rally in, social distance, wear their masks, and still be able to make a ton of noise to disrupt the away teams. And, that could be a huge X factor. We don't know. This Bronco faithful, they always have some tricks up their sleeves with the types of chants that they do. And now we're going to summarize this up. Chris, what is your final score prediction for this game? Let the people hear it.
Man, Austin, I think this is going to be a close game. I think that Peter Anderson and this Barrington offense are just going to have that much more than this Prospect D. And so I think I'm going to take Barrington 28-24 over the Prospect Knights.
You know, I will follow along the same pattern as you. I'll try to not let my Barrington bias get in the way. Of course, I'll root for them, but, you know, I'm coming in at an unbiased lens. And, you know, I think the teams are surprisingly going to be in a little bit of a defensive battle in the first half. But you know how Barrington rolls in the third quarter, and Prospect, they like to get after it as well. And I think that's when the points start coming in. And I say Barrington beats them just by the edge, 33-31. But, you know, it could go either way. And we'll see you tonight at the game. We're looking forward to it. I'm Austin Molinaro.
And I'm Chris Kaleko.
And we'll see you on the field.